Welcome once again to another cigar-chomping, plasma-casting, skull-ripping episode of What Happened, the show that cuts to the bone of the developmental problems of the video games, movies, and media that made us all into sexual tyrannosaurs.
Like me.
This week, we'll be hunting down the reasons as to why 2018's The Predator, is one of the most lambasted sequels in recent sci-fi memory, comfortably joining the ranks of the many red-headed stepchildren of its sister franchise, Alien. Wow, that's sure a coincidence that both of these star beasts have had so many issues over the years. I wonder what the common factor could be. Anyway, to properly set the stage for this film, we need to travel back to 2010's Predators. It was a movie that was made for a modest budget, didn't have any outstanding problems during its filming, and was fairly profitable for 20th Century Fox. But, well, there is no but. That's basically it. For reasons that I can only surmise started and ended with out-of-touch executives, despite Predator's financial success, Fox wanted to go in a different direction, and opted not to follow up on the story threads they themselves had set up. What was their plan? Well, to expand upon the franchise with more lore, characters, explosions, CGI, and to spend even more money doing so. The longtime producer of the Predator films, John Davis, and Fox exec Matt Riley started shopping around the idea of a much grander vision, simultaneously positioning the series as an event film with added spectacle, but also somehow still relying on nostalgia to bring in the old fans. I mean, that sounds like a great plan. How could it fail? Let's find out. Shane Black, who played Hawkins back in the 1987 original, as well as doing some uncredited rewrites, had a bit of a career resurgence in the mid-2000s with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, a film that, while not commercially successful, was a big hit with critics and helped push Robert Downey Jr. during the early days of his own comeback. But really, it was Black's reunion with the actor a few years later on Iron Man 3 that really made Hollywood senpai notice him again. Wanting to tap into his recent success, he was then approached by Fox to write and direct a new Predator movie, which he was initially a bit hesitant over. When Fox and Davis explained their plan to elevate the series with bigger scope and therefore bigger budget, well, that was the impetus for him to sign on. As long as he could take his writing partner, Fred, I directed Monster Squad Decker along with him. When asked why he took the project on, officially, he was quoted as saying, "I thought, wouldn't it be great, just as a lark, to go back and be a kid again? What could it hurt to revisit a time that was so special and a type of filmmaking before video games and CG polluted the market with visual overload? When you're forced to rely on a bit more ingenuity to conjure the same sort of effects. It'll be a lark. Let's do it." Now, considering what we'll be talking about later, moaning about video games and CG overload should probably place his quote in the Hall of Fame of poorly aged things on poorly aged things. Fred Decker and
Mr. Black
submitted their first script to Fox in and around November of 2015, and wouldn't you know it, Fox asked for some rewrites. One of their notes most likely included an ending sequence where Alan Dutch Schaefer was to make a quick cameo, setting up the next film. This is because, around that same time frame, Arnold Schwarzenegger was directly asked if he had been approached about going mano-a-mano with the dreadlocked warrior race one more time, and he flatly said no. A few months after that, in January of 2016, he confirmed he was going to be wined and dined by Shane Black to discuss his potential involvement, most likely at Fox's behest. We know this was Fox's doing because the Austrian Oak was asked to have a similar cameo back in Predators, where he was going to emerge from a spaceship in the final shot to enlist the help of the surviving characters, and he said no to that as well. Logically then, it's not really shocking he turned down Shane Black's offer the second time around, saying he didn't particularly like the script and would only consider it if his role was fleshed out with extensive rewrites. Fox, for their part, also didn't particularly want to succumb to this demand, as an expanded Arnold role would lead to a much more expanded budget. Regardless, the rest of the movie's casting forged on ahead, with a few different names being tossed around. Benicio del Toro and Curtis 50 Cent
"Where's my skull?"
Jackson were initially sought out for two of the main roles, but both dropped out early on for reasons unknown. The cast would eventually be filled out with the bad guy from Logan, Theon Greyjoy, the Punisher, Key from Key and Peele, Psylocke, Adama from Battlestar, well kinda, and the toothy nightmare that is Jake Busey. Trouble started brewing almost instantly. While principal photography was set to begin September of 2016, it was delayed a further 5 months for I don't know why, until February of 2017, with the shoot wrapping up that May. Now, Fox had previously announced a final release date of March 2018, which would then only leave the crew just 13 months for both production of the normal and post-varieties. Then, when Fox realized this meant that the Predator would have to go up against the mighty jaws of that year's Meg, they bumped the release date up by a month, which gave the crew even less time. Now, towards the end of that principal photography, set pics leaked onto the internet that whip fans into what they most often find themselves in: a frenzy. Said pictures showed a duo of camo-dripped predators partying it up with the human characters on a tank. The fan reaction to these pictures wasn't, shall we say, enthusiastic, and certainly stirred up much grumbling from within the fanbase, despite no one actually having any context for the scene. Along with these set pics, details then started to come out about the script itself, which gave a good deal away about where Black and Decker were taking the franchise.
What the hell's he doing?
This script leak, coupled with the lukewarm reception of those set pictures, plus a review of the rough cut of the film, or a combination of all of these factors, was enough for the studio to order an extensive round of reshoots. While lots of little bits and bobs would be interwoven throughout the film, the bulk of them would make up the entire third act of the movie. Now, while I'm sure many of you are already groaning at the sheer mention of reshoots, it is never by any means a death nail or wrist claw through the solar plexus of a motion picture. The entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, Back to the Future, hell, even the original Predator went through extensive reshoots, as that movie had its own unique issues. But there, of course, have been just as many box office bombs that have suffered from their creators getting cold feet, or more commonly, through studio interference. The entire crew were then brought back to Vancouver, BC to completely redo the final act, changing just about everything. Runtime of the original cut was also a concern, as the movie was clocking in to be the longest in the franchise, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 hours plus. So a good 45 minutes was slashed, skinned, and chopped out, but at the same time, they also needed to shove more things back in. One of the biggest cuts in this whole mess was Edward James Olmos's entire character, a general that had a small but pivotal role as the head of the Stargazer organization. When comparing the leaked script with the final film, fans have pieced together what was added and subtracted, and it paints an image of a movie that was even busier and over the top. In the theatrical cut, there's only 2 Predators, which makes no sense given the title, whatever, but in the original version, there were technically a dozen, sorta? Okay, so there's the Preds with the camo shorts from the leaked set pictures. They were basically the nerd scientist Preds, but there was also going to be a platoon of other gene-spliced Predator hybrids that the principal cast was going to have to fight in that third act. The intent here was to show off the other experiments that the greater Yachwa scientific community was cooking up. And we're talking multi-armed predators decked out with tusks and tentacles and all manner of throbbing proboscises. Probosci? This finale was also supposed to take place during the day, but all of it was just cut and totally reshot. The focus was instead placed squarely on the awkwardly big shoulders of the ultimate predator, where he hastily kills off much of the cast in a cornucopia of sloppy editing and CGI nonsense. If you watch this climax with any degree of attention, you'll just, feel it. Characters show up from out of nowhere, covering dozens of miles in seconds. You're just confused. People are killed so suddenly and with so very little payoff. It's just one big galaxy-sized oof. Now, Shane Black spoke publicly about these reshoots, saying how they had too many antagonistic threads, and adding that, "I would like to think that it was largely a common decision that I brought to the studio's attention that they agreed with. We started the special effects for these scenes and the Predator was walking around in the daylight during the climax. It looked cheap without the mystery and ambiance that you're used to from that first movie." That is a bit of a weird thing to say, as there are plenty of day shots of the crab-faced creature in the first movie, and wanting the audience to see even less and be constantly confused was something already pretty perfected in AVP Requiem. Did we really need to revisit that again? Now, since Arnold turned down that ending cameo role, there was also the issue of what the ending stinger was going to be. While every film in the series, save for the first, heavily wink-winks and nudge-nudges at more sequels, the Predator outdoes them all. Spoilers for this shitty movie. The Predator Killer power-up armor took on so many different potential roles during filming and editing, with some of them being mere crazy suggestions, while others were actually shot. This included making the Predator Killer Dutch Schaefer, naturally, but also bafflingly, mystifyingly, it was at one point planned to have the big reveal be Lieutenant First Class Ellen Louise Ripley. And if that's not insane enough, it was thrown around to be Newt, like Newt from Aliens, all grown up. Like, I guess stupid ideas mostly happen when you're desperate. Mostly. This all reeks of Weyland Yutani, 20th Century Fox, wanting to link the two universes yet again, despite that really not working out the last time they attempted it. This stinger was almost certainly another reshoot because the leaked script still alludes to Dutch picking up the survivors via the Choppa, which would then lead to more sequels. But since Arnold turned it down years prior, it's unclear what was shot originally. Since we're talking about a big-budget sci-fi sequel here, no one close to the production has publicly talked about what other insanity they had initially shot. Now, due to all these reshoots, which added tons more, video game and CGI overload, see what I did there? The Predator got another big delay from February to August of 2018, then another delay to September. If you want people to come to your big event picture, actually picking a date and sticking with it is usually pretty important. Constantly shifting the release date around is a good way to let people know something might be amiss here. Then, on the eve of the movie's Hollywood red carpet premiere, it was given a further black eye when it was revealed that Shane Black had casted a personal friend in a scene where Olivia Munn's character is introduced. unbeknownst to everyone at the time of the scene's filming was that this friend was a registered sex offender convicted of the attempted coercing of a minor. Due to this controversy, Fox hastily cut the scene out of the film, which is why Munn's character suddenly just appears without properly being set up. Now, you know that saying, there's no such thing as bad publicity? Well, that doesn't apply here. It also didn't help that the movie's script put forward the idea that autism was some type of superpower coveted by intergalactic space weirdos. So, given the shaky marketing, the shifting release dates, the reshoots being made public, the leaked script, and the film's quality, The Predator was skinned alive by critics and a heavy contingent of fans. It generated a very modest $24 million in North American theaters during its first weekend, and ended its worldwide tally with $160 million when the hunt was all said and done. Now, that's actually a good deal more than the financial trophy skull that Predators made in 2010, topping out with about $127 million. Difference being, Predators only cost $40 to produce, while The Predator's price tag wound up being $88 million, more than double. I'm no math doctor, but I'm almost positive that means Predators was more profitable overall. Not only that, The Predator saw far worse reviews than 2010's effort, with many critics pointing out how the film simply falls apart in that third act. Now, as for my own perspective, as a fan of the series, when I saw the film for the first time, I could certainly be heard muttering, "What the fuck?" It's true, we can't be sure that the original cut was going to be any better, as it seemed to have even more going on in terms of characters and creatures, but almost certainly would have at least felt more cohesive than when wound up on the silver screen. Nowadays though, unless you're at the zenith of the Hollywood elite, directors have seen less and less power during the creation process of a film, a sentiment shared by Black himself. Given the cost and the necessity of meeting a certain quota in terms of recouping your investment, the playground factor for directors has diminished, that's for certain. It's collaboration at best and scrutiny at worst, given to the films that are not allowed to fail. There's a dearth of risk-taking in a lot of films. Ultimately, it's up to me to argue whether a risk is worth taking, but it's certainly going to be easier if it doesn't have a high budget. Speaking of Black, at the time of this video, he hasn't gotten any other projects off the ground. He was at one point heavily involved with a Doc Savage adaptation, but that seems to have long since fizzled out. Thankfully though, the Predator franchise is pretty much iconic at this point, and even if the odd movie doesn't post record profits, the fan base for the intergalactic beastie remains. Merchandising, comics, and various video games are seemingly never-ending, so much so that Fox, now Disney, knows that they still hold a valuable IP. In case some of you had missed it, just last November, one new upcoming Predator film has been confirmed, as well as another that's right now an industry rumor. The director behind 10 Cloverfield Lane has been developing a project under the working title of Skulls, which pits the space hunter against an indigenous tribe during the American Civil War, and is set to shoot this May. As for that rumored project, well, how does a direct sequel to Predators, starring Adrian Brody and Arnold Schwarzenegger in a featured role sound? Fuck yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought. So while Shane Black's reimagining didn't quite work out, it seems that the fishy-smelling big game hunter isn't going anywhere.
Stick around.
If you know of any other mismanaged mandible movie monstrosities, let me know in the comments below, drop down into my official Twitter, or claw your way into the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to nominate the next target I'll be hunting down next. See you next time, and thanks for watching.